Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. The Beyond Compliance here. My name is Aaron Bolshaw with Safety Chain Software. I'm the moderator of Beyond Compliance, and we've got a great presentation today. We've got three featured panelists. Before we get in, just want to set the table a little bit. Beyond Compliance is a periodic industry update for process manufacturers. The goal here, just to bring you all insights around the market that shape the way we grow our businesses, deliver quality products to customers, mitigate supply chain risk, and safeguard our brands, all while improving, of course, yields and maximizing productivity. And today we are getting a master's level course on OEE, aka overall equipment effectiveness, which is often thought of as that pulse of a manufacturing plant's health. I love OEE. So with that, I wanted to kind of get in before we go any further. Want to make sure you understand Safety Chain is the #1 plant management platform to improve yield, maximize productivity, ensure compliance. Not only does it have OEE, it has quality EHS maintenance and supplier management. Lots of good stuff there. So, but we want to hear from you. We can't hear you. We don't hear you. You can only hear us, but we want to hear from you. If you have any questions through the presentation today about OEE, please just use the console on your right there to send us some questions. We'll get to those at the end of the presentation. We'll ask our presenters to help us out there. So we're scheduled for about an hour, and for everyone's favorite question, we always get this in the chat. If you want to get the slides and the recording from today, all you have to do, just ask. We'll make sure to follow up with you individually following this presentation. So with that, my pleasure to introduce today's panelists. We've got from TBM, David Hicks is the Vice President, Maintenance Excellence and Practice Leader, tons of industry experience. John Alford, similarly Senior Management Consultant, specifically for maintenance and OEE, subject matter expert. And then we've got Tony Van Dyke, Senior Management Consultant, also maintenance and OEE subject matter experts. All of them are joining us from across the globe. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining Beyond Compliance.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you.
Very good. We were just talking about this before we started. We've got a lot of great people on the phone. This is that master's level course. We want to understand and unpack how to get to that magic number, 82, 85%. These are hard numbers to get to. But before we jump into all of that, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about TBM and what you folks do.
Yeah, sure. Let me give you a quick background. Our TBM Consulting Group is an global operations and supply chain consultancy. We work primarily with manufacturing companies, but we've also got clients in a variety of industries. We do a lot of work in mining in South America and other things as well. So we, as an organization, we're 31 years old. So, we've been around for a while. We've been through leadership changes and been successful and managed to stay the course. Most of our consultants, almost all of our consultants, are really hands-on. They've had years of experience in industry before they come to work at TBM. They've led operations, many at a director level or even executive level. They've been involved in continuous improvement activities and roles their entire career. And we're a little bit different from a lot of consultants. You don't normally find us sitting in a conference room pounding away on a laptop. If you want to look for us, you generally have to go out on the shop floor because that's where the work is that we're doing. So we're focused on speed. TBM stands for time-based management. We're a big believer that speed wins every time, and so that's what we focus on and help our clients deliver.
Very good. Time-based management. Time is money. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, with that, let's. I'm going to hand the presentation over to you all. You guys are going to let me know when you need to go advance the slide. Why don't we start out by just kind of giving an overall agenda and then jump into it, okay?
Yeah, sure. So when we put together this webinar, we kind of build it as moving the needle for businesses that are kind of at a high level already of OEE. How do I squeeze 1 or 2 more points out of OEE? And so we're going to go through some things that we see. And after we put all this together, I thought, you know what, it doesn't matter if you're already at a high level or if you're not. I think the things that we've identified can help any organization. So we'll go through those. We'll talk a little bit about translating OEE improvement into financial improvement, and then we'll be happy to take your questions. So
Excellent.
we'll move along. Start off with some data. It's always good to throw a little data out and see what we do. I'll draw your attention to the fine print. First of all, the source of this information is Industry Week, which is a publication that probably you're all very familiar with. This is from their best plants application process. So the winners and finalists from the years 2015 to 2019, 69 plants. I don't know. I'm sure it's a variety of industries. When I first looked at this, there were a couple things I immediately looked at. First of all, the mean and the median are very similar. So on average, these facilities are at 82 to 83% OEE. That's pretty darn good. The other thing I looked at, and I noticed right away, was the range, right? The difference between the minimum and the maximum. So that's a pretty big range. So even amongst plants that consider themselves, best in class, there are some lower OEE scores. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then the final thing I thought about was, there could be a certain, I'll call it a danger, if you will, of trying to compare plants using OEE. So especially plants that are in different industries, that are in different organizations. I mean, I've worked with clients that even plants in the same division, you really can't compare using OEE. People do calculate it differently. You would think it's a straight up calculation, but what gets put in, what gets left out changes from location to location. So it is a fantastic tool to put a line in the sand and go, okay, here's where we're at today. And then let's look at it later and later and later, and let's see the progress that we're making. It's a great, great tool for that. I often tell people that if you told me I'm going to run a plant and I can only have one metric, I would pick OEE. It's not such a great tool to compare sites and locations. So I would just throw that out as a caution. So we'll move to the next slide, please.
I think people do naturally use that number to compare sites and plants. I'll dig into that a little bit later. But
Yeah.
before we do, guys, I like to set the stage a little bit. I'd like to open up a poll for our audience and just kind of, you know what, we're not going to take notes. We're not going to expose names or anything like that. But we're going to ask very quickly, what's your current OEE score? Okay, I'm going to launch a poll. I'm going to ask everyone in the audience, take just a minute to give us what you are. Again, we're not going to share names. This is not a, hey, who, trying to see who can do best, but we're interested in understanding where everyone in the audience is at. Okay, so is it less than 60%? By the way, that's common if you're starting. Is it 61 to 70, 71 to 80? If you're over 80%, congratulations, that's a fantastic number. Maybe you're not calculating OEE. So I'll give it a couple more seconds and then we'll actually show everyone the results of the poll. So we've got 42% voted. Go ahead and click that button. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. And while we're doing that, gentlemen, is there a number you guys sort of see on average where before TBM comes in and does consulting and you benchmark this, is there a number that people you'd share, like it's, in general, you start at maybe 50%, 60%? What's that number?
Yeah, I think that obviously that number is going to vary, but it's not uncommon when people are starting out to be as low as 40%.
Yeah.
And then again, as they drive improvement, it's like anything else, the low-hanging fruit is usually pretty easy to get. We can get up to a certain level, and then what tends to happen is there's a plateau. And so it's getting over that hump right? And that's the kind of thing we want to talk about today.
All right. Well, this is what people told us. This is, so first of all, I want to say fantastic. If you're not calculating OEE, you are in the right room. Secondly, if you're in that over 80% mark there, I want to talk to you after this. We need to understand what you're doing. Because again, it is not an easy task to get to that 80%, but this is exactly why we're here. So with that, thank you everyone for doing that poll. We'll have one more of those later on, but back to the panelists here. There's some hidden gems, right, of OEE potential.
And so when we sat down as a team and started talking through, look, again, if I have a client that is at a very high level of OEE, what things do we ask them to look to, right? Where do we go to try and squeeze out that last 1 or 2%? These are the three areas that we came up with: startup, changeovers, and brief stops. And within each of those, there are specific areas that we want to look at. And again, I think, as I mentioned earlier, and I saw when we shared what our OEEs are, you don't have to be at a high level of OEE to take advantage of this. I think you're going to find it very helpful. So let's move on to the next one. So again, that startup area that we said, look, there are some things to look for. So variation in standards, the first hour of production, and speed and consistency. So let's talk through. I'm not going to hit every bullet, but I'm going to highlight a couple things that resonate with me. And the first is in variation in standards. If you work in a multi-shift operation, you have probably experienced this. It is not uncommon that people on different shifts interpret and apply standards differently, right? And so you'll see this if you're tracking your OEE, and you look at one of the things that you should always look at, again, in a multi-shift operation, is what are the differences between my shifts, right? Because you want to learn and you want to get better. And if I have a shift that's a star performer, I want to know what they're doing so I can apply it in the other shifts. By the same token, if I have a shift that's lagging a little behind, it's nice to know, right? So you'll see this in the difference between shifts. I recently worked with a client that we saw this exact same thing. There was a 3-shift operation. 2 of the shifts were doing quite well. They were in the 80 to 82% range, and 1 was really behind. They were low 70s, and so that stood out like a sore thumb. So we got into it a little bit, and did some research, had to spend time on that shift to understand what was going on. And what we found was that we had a brand new inspector on that shift. And this person, as a new inspector, was trying to be very diligent and do a good job. And so they were applying standards in a very rigid fashion, right? So we spent some time with them, understood what they were doing, and then did some additional training with this person, put them on one of the other shifts to shadow a more senior inspector, then brought them back to the shift they were assigned to. And guess what? Immediate improvement in OEE. So again, this is something that happens quite a bit. So the second point, the first hour, this is one that it's very common to see performance degradation from the last hour of one shift to the first hour of the next shift. I see that a lot. I actually have clients that if they struggle with tracking hour by hour charts, I'll tell them, all right, forget about it. Let's start by tracking the first hour and the last hour, because those are the big transition hours and the ones where you tend to lose some of your productivity. So it's very common. A job, whether it's a work cell, whether it's a line, production line, whatever it is, could be running just fine at the end of one shift, and the next shift comes in, and all of a sudden we look at it and we're missing our targets. What happens? Well, we all know operators come in, and if they're given the freedom to make adjustments, they will gladly do so, right? If I'm the operator, I come in and I go, oh, I don't run that there. I run it here, and I change this and I change that. And guess what? You end up with impact on your OEE, negative impact on your OEE. So really, really important is to use that hour by hour chart, because you will see the impact when you look at the last hour of the previous shift, first hour of the existing shift, and you see that difference. There's a very good chance that what you're seeing is operators making adjustments that they probably should not be making, right? So if that's the case, you can establish standard work. You can create some controls so that certain adjustments can't be made. Right. The other one I want to talk about in this first hour doesn't apply everywhere, but certain industries are heavily regulated. We were kind of chatting about this a little bit before the webinar began, but take aerospace, for example, very heavily regulated. And I worked with a facility that was doing a spray coating for an aerospace application. And what happens is when you change shifts, when you have a new operator come in, even within a shift, then the very first piece that gets produced has to go to quality and get approved, right? So what happened in this facility was the spray booths, which were in the far corner of the facility, the operators would come in, they would spray a part, and then they would take it to the quality control lab. And guess where it was located? At the far end, other end of the facility, right? So now I've got the person who's doing the value add work traipsing across the factory, waiting to get the QC approval, and then going back to the booth and starting back up, right? So we looked at that and we knew immediately what had to happen. We did a really nice job creating a mobile QC station so that instead of taking that part to QC, we took QC to the part. We had a dramatic improvement in that first hour productivity, right? And that's, again, if you're doing well on OEE and you're trying to squeeze out a couple points, that first hour can be very important. Okay, the speed and consistency. I guess the point I really want to touch on here is what I've seen is a lot of variation in startup. So anytime we have a startup, we introduce a lot of variability into the process. And a couple things that can happen. I see operators that try to shortcut a startup procedure. So again, they're trying to do what they think is right for the business. They're being diligent. They're saying, hey, I want to get into production quicker because that's good for the company, and they might skip a couple steps to get going. And then I always try to remind people the old saying, shortcuts make long delays. And that's what can happen, right? So you don't follow those procedures item by item, you can create issues that'll translate into OEE impact. The other thing I see is kind of the opposite of that. This is especially true when you're starting up an operation that has a temperature that has to get to a certain set point. Sometimes what I'll see is that the temperature will reach a set point and the operator will not start up right away. They wait. And almost always when I ask them, why are you waiting? Why don't you start up? And the answer is, well, I just want to make sure we're at the right temp. Right? So they're giving it that little bit of extra time, and they don't realize that, again, that little bit of extra time could be meaningful in our OEE measurement. So yeah. I will, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tony, and we'll go to the next slide, and Tony can speak to that.
Yeah, very good. Before we go to that next slide, I wanted to say something. You said this, Dave, but those operators you're talking about, they're doing what they think is best. They are 100% there doing they believe fully what
Absolutely.
they're doing the right thing, right?
Yep.
So this is important to note. A lot of the inconsistencies that we see even on the safety chain side in our customers is that simple fact where they believe they're doing the best they can, the right thing to do, whether it's waiting for the temperature a little bit more or whether it's, hey, I'm going to do a couple of extra little things before that startup, like you're talking about tweaking the process on that first hour. And that does impact things. But again, it's really interesting to hear, those stories from you all, knowing this is common, right? So.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I've never met an operator that will tell you, oh yeah, I tweaked that because I want to sabotage the business. That's just not the case, right? They want to do a good job, and as you point out, they're doing what they think is right for the business.
Yep, absolutely.
And I'd actually build on that. Usually what happens is they're doing that from experience. They've had problems in the past. And what they learned was when I did this tweak or when I did that tweak, I got this result. And so then they think, oh, that's the best thing that I should be doing. So they're making decisions sometimes in that way, in a if you like, in an individual and isolated way, rather than trying to understand on a broader aspect what is the best thing that we should be doing.
Very good point, Tony. Absolutely.
Okay, so let's. So I'm here to talk about changeovers, and again, one of the things that Dave mentioned, and really, which is a key thing here, is we're trying to, understand what drives variation, and the three areas that I've got covering under changeovers touches on that. So if we think about scheduling, I mean, ideally, the scheduling is like it optimizes our efficiency and productivity. That's what the schedule is about. But when you come to that first bullet point there, really what happens here is when we do a break-in, well, what that is, we're going away from that nominal sequence, and we're building that variability in, and usually it comes in some kind of over-processing. And an example that I have is a company that I was working with recently was doing flexographic printing, running flexographic printing presses, and to optimize cleaning and the running time, it was preferred to schedule the jobs to run from the ink units from light inks to dark colors. So that what they're basically saying is when you come to do a, you move from your next color, you're going to a darker color. It's a lot easier to do a clean and run and get started again because the light colors run out quicker by a darker color. But if you do a break-in, what can happen with a break-in? Obviously, you're coming in now at a darker color in an area in between your sequence. And what that means is you have to take longer to actually do the clean to actually get there. And again, that would impact those OEE figures that I was talking about. Okay, so another area that we can, that we sometimes often forget about OEE, and that is influenced by the whole of the value chain. So, we need to think about if we don't receive the raw materials on time or in the quantity or the quality that is required, then normally what it means we have to reschedule and we have to do different things. Other things that can affect that is if we're trying to, there's a, we've got a courier. It's the end of the shift. We've got the truck is leaving at 3 o'clock. We need to have these products on board. Basically, what that can do is we can then influence the team and they can start doing things differently, and we can compromise our quality and different things like that. And the one that we've got on the bottom there is about size changes, and it's an interesting one. Size changes. It's when you come to do a changeover, a size change has lots of impacts, but usually it's impacting what we will call the bottleneck machine. But what we tend to forget is the other parts of the equipment that we need to use. An example that I have here is when I was working with recently actually with a company that does blow molding. And you've got the actual machine itself that does blow molding, and then the next step, it goes through a leak tester. It might even do a camera check, and then finally it will do a automatic packing machine. And there's effectively conveyors in between each of those steps. And what I found, I was watching a few of the changeovers, and the longest time that it was taking was not setting up the actual molding machine. It was actually trying to readjust and set the guide rails. It was getting the leak tester and getting that working correctly to the new size. And with the packing machine, because now you've changed the footprint, again, setting that up. And what we found, we was losing a lot of time on those actual aspects. So it's another key thing to look for. Okay, so when we think about setup as another area, is that when we think of this as it comes down to this standard timings. And again, Dave Nine kind of touched on this a moment ago, and it's a common error that we have in a lot of businesses, is that what we find is they don't go back and visit the standard times or the changeover times, and things may have changed. We may have made improvements, but we haven't gone and put it into those particular, into the documentation. So when we're planning and scheduling, you can see those things there. And usually what happens there is that now allows that variability again, because you'll have, one team working to the extreme of the standard and kind of like working and keeping it to a, to the quickest team possible. And another one may be working to the other extreme. So you do find that variation that's in there. Okay, finally, what I was going to do is talk about the ramp up, and this kind of crosses over a lot with regard to what Dave was saying earlier on. And so if we think of equipment that has heat perform its primary function, such as a drying oven or an extruder, what small variations in how we can have a significant impact on that changeover timing with regards to how we ramp it up or we ramp down. I've seen where one team will ramp up using like 2 temperature stages, whilst another will use like 3 different steps. And what the concept was with the team that was using 2 stages, it's 2 coarser steps, but that in their mind they think it gets quicker to the optimum that we need to do. But what they tend to forget is it starts to then overshoot. And then what we do is we get into a stage where it's kind of to-ing and fro-ing before it actually gets to that steady state. Whereas if they took the time and did the 3-stage process, they'd actually get to that stable position quicker. So that's a scenario that I've seen. Another thing that we can get ramp up variation is where we have, like, we're going from one product to another product, and that's a lot of the time that will come down to product operator knowledge, how frequently they run that particular task or those particular things, the skills that they've learned from that. And again, that generates opportunities for variations between the different setups. One of the things that Dave touched a moment ago, he was talking about changeover, and he talked about shift changeover, and it wasn't really in here, but I've actually seen this, and I was measuring the output from, effectively it was a paper mill, and you could see from one shift to another how the actual it actually moved, and that came back to the point that we was discussing, which Aaron raised, was the idea that when the next shift comes on, they like the machine set up a specific way, and they'll go and change and set the machine to a specific, so that this is how it runs. And I have seen that quite often, not only on that scene, I've seen it on the printing presses as well. So it is something that is seen a lot. Okay, so my section has been talking about larger stoppage reasons. My friend and colleague John, he's going to talk about more kind of like to do with like the smaller stops and things like that with you all. Okay. So Aaron, if you could move it on.
Yep, we will. There you go.
Thank you, Tony. I'm going to talk briefly kind of about brief stops and the 3 areas I have, but they all 3, even though I have a category about cycle time, but cycle time is real important. When we talk about downstream equipment, sometimes what I have seen in my career is that there's lots of different downstream equipment that can really affect what's going on with what I would call your main equipment that's making the product. I worked with a blow machine client, and we were making plastic detergent bottles, but our downstream equipment was causing us to back up and scrap the bottles, and God forbid if you shut that machine down. So their cycle is so important with that downstream equipment that it's in sync, that it's running maybe a little faster. When we talk about cycle time, in OEE we talk about ideal cycle time. Equipment has an ideal cycle time. I've run across, and I think Dave touched on this, in operators, they are so passionate about their work, but sometimes they feel like, hey, you know what, if I turn this down a little bit, the piece of equipment will run better. And maybe it will because the equipment hasn't been maintained correctly, but wow, can that affect your OEE and other things. And conveyance, how we convey our product, making sure we have the cycle times in sync. But the one that really, when you're really chasing that 85%, those micro stops, they're the ones that are so hard to see. And I've had clients that have gone with some systems where they can get real-time data, and that helps you understand them. But not all companies have that luxury. So I can remember one time I was out in the plant, and we were just stalled, and we wanted to get that extra couple percentage points, and we just didn't know where we were losing it. So I parked myself and I started watching. We were entering our downtime into SAP. We had codes for everything, and I noticed some quality checks that were happening that was causing a stoppage, and they weren't getting recorded. So, once again, that passionate operator said, we have to do these quality stops, but that shouldn't really affect our performance because we want to make sure we have good product. So the moral of that story is, a lot of times we don't have good standards for our operators to understand. Sometimes they take liberties. Sometimes we overdo our quality things. So, and don't get me wrong, quality is not bad, but when you're chasing something, you want them, because OEE has a quality piece of it. You want to make sure you have good quality, and everything's in that standard. Those Microstops are hard to find, but I do think that if you're really running at a high OEE, and you're trying to really, get to that next little level, having real-time data really helps find those particular small ones. So I think we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, and this is great. So a couple of things you mentioned, interestingly enough, these Microstops. I never really thought of it like that before, but those really eat away, right? And if you're not document it, if you're not calling them what they are, then you're not going to be able to get to that root cause, right? And we're passionate about quality, you have to be, but that standard that you're talking about is really the thing you want to focus on, right? So I have another question I'd like to ask everyone, and this is just another poll question. You'll see this launch in just a second on your screens. Similar as last time, just want to get the temperature in the room, right? When and how often are you reviewing OEE? Just select one of the following. Are you looking at it at shift kickoff? Are you doing it throughout the day, right? John just said, hey, that real-time data, that is supreme. That is really great. That's awesome if you can do that. Are you doing it at a shift handoff or a changeover of some kind, or are you doing it at a plant level? Is this something that you have as a KPI, right, for your plant, or is it something, maybe all of the above? And we've got about 16% people voted. Remember, get your votes in real quick. I would hazard a guess that most folks are really looking at this. If it's not the kickoff meeting, it's that day after. Like, how did we do? You kind of looking in the rearview mirror. Gentlemen, is that what you typically see when you enter, as TBM kind of comes into a new client? Where are you seeing this happen most often?
Yeah, unfortunately, what tends to happen is that clients that don't use OE a lot, they'll report on it when it's too late, right? So instead of looking at it on a daily shift basis, they wait, maybe at the end of the week, maybe the end of the month, whatever the case might be. And by then you're going like, well, geez, now how am I supposed to figure out what caused that?
Yeah.
So it's really important to look at it. John said real time. That's great if you can do that, but if not, at least when you're doing your shift handoffs.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And here's what we're working with. And this is really encouraging. I'd say, having a KPI, having something that's visible to the plant is really important. That helps to instill sort of that, the belief in OEE and understanding that everybody on that line, from the operators to the management, has an impact on OEE. So this is really good to see. So I'm going to hide this really quick. We're going to get back here now. Next up, we've got some case studies, and these are fantastic. So why don't you take us through some, from the trenches, right? What are we looking at here?
All right, so this was an interesting thing that happened with me quite a few years ago. We had a car that was just, selling like hotcakes, and we had a supplier building wheels for us, and it looked like they were going to shut us down. So I went with a team to that plant to see just what was going on. So the first thing we found out was that they had a 25% rejection rate, which that's one wheel. So 3 wheels on a car is not a good thing, right? So pretty high rate, but they weren't really capturing it because they were just remelting it, and it was like, well, we just remelt it, so it's not a real loss, but well, it was. And the big thing is we were looking at potentially putting another shift on, which would have been a great cost to put another shift on, or try to add production somehow. But anyways, as we looked at this thing, we found out, back to this ideal cycle time. It's important that we understand cycle time. And the other thing we understand in casting, porosity is something that just, it's a tough thing, but this was a high rate. And really what it came down to, I'll do it real quick, was the operator had to run 2 machines. They were like presses that made these wheels. But if you stay open too much, there's a certain amount of time, the porosity gets greater. So anyways, standard work was applied, and also some work on the equipment. But it really came back to understanding cycle time. And I preach this all the time, understanding cycle time. So the result, we lowered the porosity from over 25% to less than 6. No plant shut down, and that car got to keep going, and it was a hot seller at the time. Okay.
That's amazing. Yeah, and it's funny when here we go again. That operator thought they were doing the right thing, right? The whole time, right? Fantastic study. We got a second one here, packaging, right?
Okay, so this case study, I want to talk about. The first thing I want to explain is you think about measuring OEE, and that was a nice lead-in that we got from John there. And actually, when they were measuring OEE on these machines, this is a paper mill that we're working with, and the paper mill itself, they wasn't measuring all 3 aspects of OEE. They wasn't measuring availability, because they classed the machine as being always available, we're always running it, and all, and those things. So they were measuring OEE, but they were using quality, and they was using performance as the key things that they was driving. Now we got involved, and obviously we started to say that we can start to measure the availability. It is important. You can see that they was running at a reasonably high figure, and this case study was actually looking at many other things, not just OEE, but I pulled out the things that were more related to that. And if we discuss some of those, is that one of the key things we worked on there, and you can see, is changeovers. And again, this was my pitch that I was talking about earlier on. And effectively here, what we had to do is we worked with the team to create a standard work. Now, on the paper mill, a particular paper mill that I was working with, I mean, this thing was like over 800 meters long, one section. And so you would have a team of guys walking along the machine as you was trying to set the, doing the changeover or doing the change. And so getting them in the right place, looking at the right things, and moving at the right time to get, that was a key aspect of this. So, we made some big improvements on this, just doing changeovers. Like there's what you call the dry end. We could get that's where you're doing, you're putting the pulp through and then you're going through the dryers. You can get improvements there. And on the wet end, that was the wet end. The dry end is where we're actually putting the coating on, even closing the coaters and opening the coaters, and at the right time, even getting the changeover time set up there. I think, I'm trying to think what they actually saved in the time. It was a huge amount of saving. So changeovers was one area. Another thing that we looked at is, you can see they talked about the equipment cycle time, and one of the things was the digester. So this is actually the pulp that's being fed into the machine, and it's like a big cooking vessel. And what they do is, after cooking the chips, it becomes like a black liquor. And what you do is it blows out the cooked pulp. And what we did, we worked to increase the amount of blows that we was getting. And I think they got about a 10% improvement is what they was going in at. And the key things that they looked at there was working on like bad valves, sequencing the blows so that they weren't superimposed on each other. So there was actually, they were separated out to get the maximum from it. And that's actually what allowed us to do that. And then obviously optimizing like your time and your temperature. And there was some Six Sigma events that the guys worked on. And a lot of that was worked on there. They were looking at the quality of the board. And one of the things that they did there was the amount of chemicals that was being used. And so they tried to reduce the amount of chemicals, but by doing that, we had to then use other levers in the machine, the speed, how we kind of like the rolling, the kind of things that we were doing in there, the heat that we applied. This would actually allow us to actually get the same physical properties. And, like one of the things was called color mismatch. Now you can actually get that into the area where you want it to be by doing other things. So that was the kind of things that was working with regards to this case study.
This is fantastic. Here's an interesting one, Tony. You discovered here, one of these bullets I want to just dig into a little bit. The OEE was in the upper 80s, and there was still room for improvement, right? $16 million is not, excuse me, chump change. You were able to look at a system that by any means was going very well according to OEE, and there was still room for improvement. This is a fantastic case study. In the quality talk, when this kind of got through all of these quality, better product acceptance, uptime, trained problem solvers, this impacted customer claims too, correct? So we're not getting as many calls downstream, we're not getting as many returns, right, or refunds, etc., right?
Yeah.
Was that included in that 16 million savings? Was that did you guys use a cost of quality to sort of sort through to get that ROI?
I think there was some savings related to that. Most of this was related to time savings and that we'd taken out of the process. But you're right, there is no doubt about, again, in this industry, one of the key things is not losing customers. So you need to keep the quality there to keep because if you lose a customer, getting the customer back on board, the cost that goes in that is actually phenomenal. So yeah.
Yeah. So this is all on the plant floor, really. This is fantastic because I mean, this is if you include what you're just talking about there, the costs really saved is much greater than 16 million. I almost guarantee it. Yeah. Very good. Very good. All right. I think we've got just some numbers, some scenarios here.
Yeah. Yeah. So I won't spend a ton of time on this, but let me just make the point and try to be as clear as I can about it. You must find a way to translate OEE percentage into dollars, right? Because the senior leaders in your organization, they might understand what OEE is, but when they see that connection between the financial impact and the OEE impact, that's when they get excited, right? So in our firm, we have created what we call an OEE calculator. I can't give it to you because it's proprietary, but trust me, if you can run an Excel spreadsheet, you can do the very same thing for yourself. There's a couple scenarios that we laid out for you that say, look, think about doing it this way or think about doing it that way. I'm sure there are many other ways of doing it. My advice would be to sit down again with your finance community and work through for your organization, how are we going to value OEE, right? You want to get to the point where whether you're a one plant business or a multi-plant business or a huge conglomerate, you want your CEO to be able to look at people and say, 1 point of OEE in this company is worth $1.2 million, right? And that's the kind of information you have to get them, and they will help you drive that improvement in OEE. Aaron, I'm thinking maybe we should do a webinar someday on just calculating the value of OEE. But again, so it's something that's very important. I encourage you to do it. Reach out if you struggle with it, and we'll be happy to talk to you.
Yeah, I think that this is fantastic. It's critical. If you can make the correlation in any scientific way, that draws the line from the quality and the overall equipment effectiveness, that whole thing, to finance, you're going to have a powerful ally in doing so, because that's when you're able to say, hey, this dollar equals X dollars. So let's either spend appropriately instead of cost saving. So I love this. These are great scenarios, and I'd love to kind of take a look at that possibility for going forward. So what about some key takeaways, some things? I mean, we want to give folks, hey, what can you do right now, right? What can you do a little differently?
Yeah, I'll speak to a couple of these, and then Tony or John, feel free to jump in anytime. But I would tell you that first point, recognize and drive all three components of OEE. It's critical, right? You always have to stratify your OEE metric. So break it down into the availability, performance, and quality. Understand which of those components is driving the value for you. And I think you'll be very, very successful once you do that and you keep the focus on those. Go down to bullet number 5, hour by hour tracking. To me, hour by hour tracking is one of the vital signs of a factory, right? So, we talk about people have vital signs, blood pressure, temperature, whatever. I think in a factory, it's that hour by hour, the pace that sets and the information that's provided on that. So I would, if you're not doing hour by hour tracking, I highly encourage you to do it. If you're looking to squeeze a couple points out of OEE, I promise you, if you go look at the hour by hour charts that you have in your plan, you will find those couple points. Right? It's too often they get glossed over. We're all really busy. We're all trying to fill orders. We're all doing all the things we got to do, that sometimes we don't take the appropriate time to really, really look at those hour by hour charts and figure out what it's telling you. Right? But the answer is there. Finally, the last point, create problem solving capability. To me, again, a big must, right? So if you want to drive improvement in OEE, you don't go out and train people here's what OEE is, right? Now, it doesn't hurt to explain it to them, but at the same time, what's going to drive the improvement is if you train people in problem solving and you get them to where they are good problem solvers, you will see an impact, a positive impact on your OEE. So Tony or John, either one of you want to add anything to this?
Well, I'd have said that, if you look at bullets 2 and 3, really what we're doing is going back to that first bullet, which is saying, because 2 is looking at we want the quality. You know, we're really saying it's the quality part of the OEE, and driving that right first time, making sure that we understand what is what we want to expect and what we expect from the right first time. And especially this comes down to the changeovers again. It's not just actually the product itself, but it's actually parts of and the setups. You know, that getting it right first time is actually important, and being vigorous about making sure that those things are being done. And then the other point that we got there is the speed losses. And this is so easy for businesses to do. We have, you know, people say the machines are old. You know, we've got these kind of things. And then when you talk to people, they will say 2-3 years ago we was running this at this speed. We was running that, and now we run it. So, you know, don't accept slippage. You've got to say, what is this machine designed for? What is it? You know, what are we capable of? Why are we not getting there? And usually when we address that point, I'm not saying to somebody go from where you are now all the way up to where go through some steps. Take it as, you know, increase the speed, solve any problems that you have at that point, increase the speed again, solve any problems that you have at that point. So go through this at a point, but definitely don't accept any slippage on speed.
Yeah, and I just want to add, you know, Tony and Dave both said very well, but you know, any kind of loss, you know, is that waste of material, people, or energy. And for me, in my years of working with teams, that last point about understanding problem solving is so important to solving those problems and understanding, because sometimes we think we got the problem, but maybe we didn't really know what the problem was. And we find that a lot of times. And I think if we ever work with any of you, I think you'll find that we are very problem solving oriented consulting group. And that's really a huge key, is, you know, getting to what the real problem is. And that's what this is about, finding those little percentage points. What's the real problem? What's driving, you know, those losses?
I think that one is, you know, just out of all of these gentlemen, that's the big one that sticks out to me. So first of all, that number 3 you're talking, Tony, that's fantastic. You know, oftentimes even in our customer base, we find that we help reset those T maxes, the theoretical max that they knew, right? This was absolutely the maximum capacity, and then they go, oh, maybe not, right? We can increase that max by not accepting the slippage. That's important. But then creating problem-solving capability, this is at the root of continual improvement, right? It's empowering those teams to say, I can do better, watch how we do things closely, identify the problems. Those are easy, right? But giving people the capacity and the, not edict, but the power, right, to solve those problems is huge, huge, huge. So that's fantastic. I think we've got a couple of questions. So I wanted to, first of all, make sure that everyone has TBM's information. So please, please, please go check out tbmcg.com. Lots of great resources there. And of course, if you want to reach out to David, John, or Tony, here's some information for you all. But we do have some questions, gentlemen. I want to get to these, and looks like we just have 5 minutes. So I'm just going to ask 2 or 3 of these questions. First one came a little early. Rob was asking, hey, we're a steel manufacturer with many different products. So think grades, sizes, product paths on that floor, right? What advice or suggestions might you have for addressing different speed and throughput rates for different products? David, you want to try
Yeah, well, I'm not quite sure I get fully the question, but at the end of the day, you know, you're going to assess OEE for those different products that have different rates and everything else independently. Now, the problem may be is you're trying to roll all that up, you know, and that, yes, that can be an issue. Sometimes you might have to look at OEE at the SKU level. I've got a lot of clients that do it that way. So they get away from the idea that, you know, I've got all these this variability in product, and instead of trying to roll it up, I'm just going to look at it right at the SKU level and drive improvement from there.
Yeah, I think
And I
that's an
think
important.
we should.
Go
I think
ahead,
we
Tony.
should go back again to what David was saying, right at the start. The whole idea of the OEE measure here is not to measure one machine against another. It's to use it on that machine and see what are the problems on that machine. What is the things that we need to do for that particular thing? So, that's another way that you could apply it. Have an OEE measure on them all. Then you start to say, well, what's the problem that I've got with this one to know why it's not where we want it to be?
Yeah, and I would just simplify that too. It's line, batch, shift, right? Be able to isolate the OEE on those three. And I think what you'll do is you'll give yourself, Rob, a chance to really isolate those problems, understand them, and then really impact all of them, right? Through those different products. So the SKU level is super important. Thanks for that question, Rob. Excuse me, we've got Tom. I gotta go back a slide because he was asking, hey, and he's got a fair question here. Let me go back here. So he was looking at scenario 2. Tom was like, wait, shouldn't we include reduction in overtime on scenario 2?
Yep, absolutely. Anytime you can pull overtime out, you want to put that in, and you'll do that. That probably, if you think about a stair step, that's the way I always think about this scenario too, right? I drive improvement, and then boom, I can take time. Let's just call it time. Maybe we shouldn't even have said headcount. We should have just said, paid time. And so you drive improvement, and the first thing you're going to do is pull out all that overtime, and then you're going to have another plateau where you get to. Then you can start to move noses out of the parking lot.
Yeah, very good. And that's a great catch, Tom. Appreciate you chatting in. Got another last question, and then we'll wrap it up here. Gentlemen, what's the right time to start doing data automation? You guys talked about a vision system a little bit earlier. You guys are very familiar with some of the automating the data off of SCADA PLCs or just the equipment, et cetera, right? Is there a right way to approach going from measuring OEE manually to doing it with automation and data automation?
So I'll give you my take on it, and then the guys can jump in. But I would tell you the wrong time to begin data automation is at the very beginning, right? If you're just starting out, I would first do this manually and get good at it and drive some improvement, and then start to think about how you do it digitally, right? So you can automate the thing. One of the watch outs when you do get to that point of automation is that sometimes the folks who sell that equipment will kind of dictate what things you would look at, right? And you don't want that to happen. You want to be the one that says, no, here's how I want to do it. So I would say, get good first. That usually involves paper and pencil, flip charts, markers, and then when you feel like it become a burden to the organization because maybe we're spending too much time doing the manual tracking, that's when you start to say, okay, maybe we got to find a way to automate this. John, you have a take on that?
Yeah, I do. I've had clients that I thought went too quick into an IoT. I absolutely, you have to learn how to block and tackle before you go on. But one thing to really keep in mind, if you do decide to go that route, pick a system that's compatible with what you have. Your CMMS, is it compatible with the CMMS? Can I drive that info through it? So I'm working with a client right now. We're looking at those capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really important, compatibility.
That's a great point. Thank you very much. Well, we're going to wrap it up here. Lance and Dave, I see your questions. We don't have time for them, but we're gonna follow up with you guys because those are two great questions about continuous process manufacturing and kind of the difference between planned changeovers and break-ins. So we'll get back to Lance and Dave individually. I appreciate those questions. And first of all, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. This is fantastic. I love the work you're doing, and we appreciate you joining us here today. We've got some resources at safetychain.com if you're interested. We've got a couple of things coming up. Are your food safety KPIs driving the right behaviors? Coming up with the Atchison Group with FSMA Friday. And then, man, it's going to be 2022, gentlemen, like this. So I wish you all the best in this year and in the next one. And we'll definitely be talking again with the three of you. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Very good. That'll wrap it up for us Beyond Compliance. Thank you everyone for joining us. Get out there and go be productive. Thank you so much. Cheers.